Welcome to the station crew. Enjoy your stay.
The detective in Space Station 14's primary job is investigating evidence in crime scenes to help determine who was at fault and who was a victim. You will work closely with security as, well, you are a security member, and the head of security is your boss. I am going to quickly explain in this video the separate mechanics. If you readied up, you'll spawn in your detective office, and I'm just going to assume that you did. Every map is different, but all maps will have a detective strobe and your detective cabinet. I will heavily recommend that in your detective cabinet, out of all things to grab, you need to take your inspector revolver, and the ammo is optional. It is also worth mentioning that you should probably take some extra forensic pads as they are required for your job, and take your forensic scanner as that is also required for your job. And in here you can find more pads, and you can either just take some extra with you or don't forget where your office is. And make sure you keep your cabinet locked. So on this station, you will actually appear in security directly. So you don't have to really look for your office. And some maps, it gets rather confusing of where to find your office, but that's a little out of scope. You are a detective. That means you are going to investigate crimes. And in order to investigate crimes, you're going to have to know the distinction between fingerprints and DNA. These are the two main tools to gather evidence about what happened at a scene. And in order to see everyone's fingerprints and DNA, you find a station records computer. Now, it isn't always going to be in security, and for example, on this map, there is no station records computer in security, but you can always ask somebody to either like bring your console to security or just gain access to one. Either way, as I am the only person on this station, and you can even see, it will show your name, age, your job, your species, your gender, your fingerprints, and your DNA. And this is the only way you're going to be able to figure out somebody's DNA on the fly. However, you can fingerprint people with a forensic pad. So for example, I'll use a forensic pad on myself. And if you put it on the ground, it'll say Alec Paulson's fingerprints, C48B, yada yada. And as you can see on the station records computer, that is indeed my fingerprints. So that's how you can get somebody's fingerprints on the fly, and you can use it to cross-reference with the station records computer. Now for DNA, it gets a little bit more complicated, because you can't just take somebody's DNA off them directly. Now let's pretend that Santiago on the radio is reported to have been attacking someone. And in this situation, obviously it's perfect. There's only one other person that could have been, which is the Birch of Stillness. Keep in mind their DNA. Santiago's DNA is GGG. The Birch of Stillness's DNA is GCG. Now, I obviously set up the scenario to make explaining this easier. Diana have blue blood, aka it's water. Everyone else has red blood, except Slimes. Slimes have green blood. And the person in question here was a dwarf. As you can see, the fight must have happened here. Now, in order to see whose DNA it is to be 100% sure, is to take out your forensic scanner and you left-click DNA. Or blood, aka DNA. It doesn't always have to be blood. It could be somebody drinking from a cup or in other things like that. So if you take the forensic scanner, you can print out your evidence. So my forensic report from my blood has the DNA GCG. And if you remember, that is the Diana's. Sometimes you have to scan certain blood puddles. So for example, if I scan this one, it doesn't have DNA because it's spread and it's like not as strong of a sample basically. But here we see the GGG DNA. If you remember, that is Santiago's. So as we could tell, a fight broke out right here. But here's how you can use your deductive skills. There was a fight. Santiago is still here and still standing, and the Diana is gone. You should try to investigate in this situation where the other person went. However, in this situation, this makes them the prime suspect because they were already reported in this scenario, and their DNA is at the scene. So as you can see, due to the detective's work, you can 100% prove that he was in a scuffle right here and that they were fighting back. Of course, this isn't always going to work because not everyone fights back and not everyone's able to draw enough damage in an assassination attempt or a murder attempt to get any real DNA. This is where fingerprints will come into handy. In order to take somebody's fingerprints, which I somewhat demonstrated earlier, you need forensic pads. And simply, to get somebody's fingerprints on the fly, you just ask them to take their gloves off, or if they have no gloves, you just left-click them with the forensic pad in your hand. And to see the fingerprints, you have to examine it, and here we go. It's 85D, and that is Santiago's fingerprints. And how you can use this to catch criminals is scan objects around them. So in this area, I see a disposal unit, and they're not wearing gloves. So if you right-click it, you can scan it. And if we scan it, look at that, 85D, 85D. This person obviously interacted with the disposals, and there is no body to be found of the person they were allegedly fighting. Now, I don't need to show it, but yes, they killed the person and flushed their body down disposals. And that is obviously a perfect scenario. If you wear any glove in the game, as I will quickly demonstrate, you will only have a fiber. Now let's assume the perpetrator, such as Santiago, was wearing their insulated gloves, as engineers often do. Well, if we rescan the disposals, you will see, the only fiber on this scanner, or on the only fiber that touch the disposals, is yellow insulated fibers. Now, yes, yellow insulated fibers are the most common type of fiber in the game, because it's on budgets and normal insulated gloves. However, this just happened, and not many people have touched this without gloves, and it is in this area. It definitely puts the blame on their back, so to speak. Now, I wouldn't use this as a reason to perma someone, because the evidence isn't perfect, obviously, because they were wearing gloves. They somewhat hid their traces. However, this still gives you a really good reason to want to detain someone and bring them back to security for possibly further searching, or maybe you'll catch a syndicate this way if they're sloppy. Anyways, you have a pretty good reason to arrest somebody if their gloves they are wearing matches a crime scene directly next to where you found them and where somebody's missing, and their DNA. Obviously, this is a rough breakdown of the detective, but in brief, it explains all the mechanics of the detective. And yes, you're going to want to practice things like organization, but this explains all the tools they have. So basically, you use your station records computer to keep track of everyone, and you need to use your forensic scanner and your forensic pads in order to actually investigate objects in the world and investigate crime scenes. I hope you learned something.